out there. This is my 6th evening where I've come on. Basically, I'm talking about complex PTSD. The whole point is to help anybody out there who might be suffering from complex PTSD. It's not so much a diagnosis, but something that happens when we've been through childhood trauma, be it violence or sexual abuse. As adults, we get to a point where we start having reactions and we get triggered by things. And I know currently it's, there's a lot of information out there. The best I've come across that really helped me is Pete Walker, Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. I got this book in December 2017, and basically, bit by bit, it began to change my life. Prior to that, I had no idea that a lot of my adult reactions were based on a specific understanding being called complex PTSD. PTSD is slightly different, is that it tends to be a one-off event that is shocking to the system or to the person or situation that needs to be dealt with. But complex PTSD is generally many, many years of abuse. So what we need to do is get to a point where we understand what flashbacks are and what we're doing, and we have the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And then when we understand that through this book, this is the book that I'm suggesting, the links will be below. Once we alleviate the flashbacks, this is the point that we need to get to. So then we can deal with the inner critic. And the fastest way is that when we begin to deal with our inner critic, we then begin to heal bit by bit. So it's like if we're berating ourselves and we're saying terrible things to ourselves, or if we feel angry about the abuse that we had when we were children, and then we tell ourselves that we've got to forgive and we shouldn't blame people, we're going to stop the grieving process, which is quite natural, that we were not allowed to have as a child. So we were not allowed to grieve when we were children, when we were being abused, and we weren't allowed to have healthy anger or healthy blame. And clearly, if we're abused as an adult, we're going to stand up for ourselves. But as children, we've got no power. We're powerless, and we have to do what adults want us to do. And it's quite tragic that this goes on out there, but it does. So I'm going to read from this book, and I'm going to read a page. I read a little bit yesterday, so you can go back on the videos that I've already made the last 5 days. They're quite short, about 15, 20 minutes each. And it's chapter 8 of this book that I've been reading. So I'm going to complete this little section today. And this is perspective, substitution, and correction. And this is about the inner critic. So it says the most important thought correction of all is a switch in the perspective of our thinking. Perspective substitution is a broadening of our overall perspective. It moves our viewpoint from the critic's narrow negative focus to the more balanced and accurate focus of the observing ego, the mindful self. So the more mindful we become that we've been through trauma and that we feel angry about it and that we've got some healthy blame going on, the more we'll be mindful that when we go into flashbacks, and we will no longer be in denial that we've suffered. A lot of people can be abused as children and hit quite regularly and say, oh, well, that was normal. Well, in my view, there's nothing normal about slapping children or hitting children or being abusive or demeaning to a child, but it does go on. And clearly it's a matter of consciousness of humanity to get to a point to understand that we don't take out our frustrations on other people or children. And I'll continue reading. Perspective substitution helps us to dethrone the critic from its life-negating point of view. This resembles the firing of a bad manager or inept coach, one with a distorted view who dwells so much on what is wrong that he cannot see anything that is right. So if we're kids and, we're never loved or there's no gratitude for us and we're not treated beautifully, then, clearly parents are human beings and they've got emotions, but there are levels that have taken place in my own life and lives of other people I know that are just tragic, really. Continuing reading, as stated in chapter 1, perspective substitution can be enhanced with the spiritual practice of gratitude. In this vein, gratitude is a type of mindfulness that looks for empirical proof that life is essentially good, even though it is also quite difficult at times. So what we can do, we can realize one way, it's maybe a strange thing to say, but one thing we can do is get to a point where we're grateful that we're adults now and that abuse can no longer happen. I mean, just starting with that is not going to happen to us again. And then we can go from there. Continuing reading, perspective substitution and gratitude. Gratitude is a delicate subject to write about because many survivors have been abused by shame and advice to just be grateful for what you have. Consequently, many survivors totally reject the concept of gratitude and throw the baby out with the scorn-sodden bathwater. Once again, this is quite understandable when you legitimately had little to be grateful for in your childhood. I mean, I relate to this, that when people have said to me, oh, you want to be grateful, I found it very offensive when I was in pain, or when people were telling me that I had to forgive when they had not experienced what I specifically went through. We need compassion for ourselves, and that's one thing that begins to happen as we work of getting rid of the inner critic. Continuing reading, he says, moreover, the concept of gratitude is damagingly used by some psychologists to support the psychological defense of denial. They tout gratitude as a fast track that can bypass traumatic pain. This is worse than observed when applied to complex PTSD survivors. It is in fact shamefully abusive to survivors because profound extended trauma cannot be resolved until it is first fully understood and worked through. So what I found with this book is that as I read it, it touched some very deep places in me because it brought to light to me that I was very angry and I felt very hurt, and I was brought up not to blame. Like, you just have to be loving to the people that have abused you, which is a really strange concept if we think about it. Like, would we be loving to people as an adult who are abusing us? Probably not. We would get them out of our lives or move away from them, or try to resolve the issue. But as children, we can't do that. Going on, he says, gratitude is nevertheless a wonderful natural experience that can recurrently enhance the quality of your life. You can cultivate a perspective that is open to noticing what there is to be grateful about, as long as you do not do it with the intention of creating a permanent feeling of gratitude. Over time, an attitude of gratitude can gradually increase authentic gratefulness. So to be grateful, authentic gratefulness is that we're, grateful for what's real. We're not making stuff up. I'm grateful that I've got a nice space to live in. I'm grateful that I've got my, the access to YouTube, that I've got, my microphone in front of me. There's so many things we can be grateful for. And I've got some nice friends that I've met through social media and so forth. So real gratitude, not, being like unrealistic about it. Continuing reading, it says, this can be illustrated with the example of love. While it is, of course, healthy to adopt cognitive attitude of love toward our friends and chosen family, it is impossible to feel loving all of the time. If I expect that of myself, I give my inner critic endless fodder to attack me for not feeling loving enough. Similarly, if I expect myself to feel grateful all of the time, I keep the critic's program of self-disappointment, hell, and hearty. So, if sometimes we're going to need tears, sometimes we're going to need to have, or not need to have a flashback, but if we have a flashback, we're going to need to be gentle with ourselves. For instance, some of us still have nightmares. I had a few this week, and they're not so scary now, but when I wake up, I can be loving to myself. I don't let it ruin my day. I understand what's going on. And a lot of people who've not been through abuse don't understand that aspect, that, it's not just about forgiveness, because when you're still having nightmares and, it's 30 years after an event, when tough, damaging stuff has happened to us, then it is a process. It's a daily process. And for some, it's going to be processing for the rest of our lives. But that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us because we're still processing. And it's not all or nothing. We'll have good days and we'll have bad days. And continuing reading. Nonetheless, aligning with attitudes like love and gratitude is generally therapeutic. When I am temporarily stuck in a flashback, feeling alienated from life, remembering what I am usually grateful for in life can sometimes pull me out of a polarized negative thinking that helps keep the flashback alive. Invoking gratitude is particularly difficult and often impossible at first because flashbacks typically stand us in an emotional overwhelm that cancels out our ability to feel anything good about life. Reminding ourselves of what is worthwhile in our lives does not seem to help much in the early phases of using this tool. So it's a tool that as we begin to use it, and I found this with me, that as I began to deal with my inner critic by telling it to bugger off, that's what the term I used. And as I began to do things like, look at myself in the mirror and tell myself I love myself, or, interacted with my inner child and protecting that little person inside of me, as I did those things, the ability for me to began to grow. So when that inner critic comes in and tries to slaughter me, I immediately knock it out the way. I tell it to go away. So continuing reading, it says, when I experience this at the end of an especially long flashback, positive noticing sometimes arises spontaneously and brings with it sweet tears of gratitude. There are also typically tears of relief and tears of an achieved sense of belonging. These tears typically arise unbidden, seemingly out of the blue. Typically, they are positively triggered by experience of beauty or connection, such as when flowers authentically strike me as beautiful once again, or when my appreciation of music returns and deeply moves my soul, or when I suddenly feel how much I love my wife, my son, my friends, or my clients. After a painful lapse in being able to emotionally enjoy these experiences, or not being able to, this return brings these gratitude-laden tears, which on really momentous occasions can facilitate between crying and laughing as I resurface into authentically being grateful to be alive. So I'm going to leave it there. I've got 2 more pages of chapter 8, which I'll read tomorrow. So my whole point here is that I want you to check out the list below, the inner critic list and the 13 flashbacks, and check out Pete Walker's book, because I've noticed that sometimes when I've gone on to share it with people from Amazon, sometimes the audio version has come up as being free. So it's worth checking in and out, because you can have the Audible version. Although he's not reading the Audible version, it's still good enough. And remember that to heal this, we've got to get to deal with our inner critic. We've got to have healthy anger. And we've got to realize that when people say anger is a bad thing, that it's not. Healthy anger is a good thing. It's a very useful tool to getting moving and then moving towards our desires in life. If we're numbed out and we've got no anger and no blame, then we're not really living fully. And then we've got healthy blame. So it's okay to feel healthy anger and healthy blame towards people that have harmed us growing up in our childhood, because it will encourage us to heal and move on with our lives. And then we get to a point of moving towards self-care and self-love. And then we get to grieve as well and get those really big tears out of us. And, it's very powerful. This book has been extremely powerful for me. If you want to join me on other lives, then hit the notification button or subscribe. And if you've got any questions, then you can comment as I'm discussing, or you can, as I'm talking, or you can also send me an email if you don't want to comment on the YouTube, because some people want to maintain their privacy. So that's it for today. I see 2 people watching, so whoever it is, thanks for being there. And I'll be back tomorrow with another 15 minutes of the last chapter of this chapter 8, the last chapter that I'm reading. Okay, thank you.